What if the prettiest plant at the nursery ended up being the worst decision you ever made for your garden? A lot of homeowners spend weeks planning the perfect yard. They research color, sunlight, spacing, bloom time, and curb appeal. They think about pollinators, drought tolerance, and maintenance. But what many people never consider is this: some plants don't just grow, they invade, they dominate. They crack, choke, smother, poison, and spread so aggressively that one small planting can turn into years of regret. And the scary part is that many of these plants are still sold because they look beautiful in pots on labels and in carefully staged garden photos. In the beginning, they seem harmless. A fast privacy screen, a cheerful herb, a dramatic flowering vine, a useful edible tuber. But a few seasons later, they're pushing through paths, swallowing beds, climbing houses, and showing up in places they were never supposed to reach. Today, we're counting down 15 destructive plants that can ruin your garden, damage nearby structures, or create a battle you never wanted to fight. We'll start with the plants that seem manageable and work our way toward the ones that can completely take over a property. Stick around, because one of the plants on this list uses chemical warfare against other plants, and the final one can turn open land into a thorny colony before you realize what happened. Let's get into it. 1. Bamboo, the privacy screen that becomes a territorial dispute. Bamboo is one of the most misleading plants in the gardening world. It looks elegant, modern, and expensive. It creates instant privacy adds movement to the landscape and gives a yard that polished resort-style look. That's exactly why so many people plant it. Then the rhizomes begin moving. Running bamboo spreads underground with shocking speed. It doesn't politely stay in one clump. It sends thick underground shoots outward in every direction, often far beyond where the original plant was placed. And because that movement happens below the surface, many gardeners don't realize how serious the problem is until new shoots begin popping up in lawns, beds, under fences, or along hardscape edges. That's when the nightmare starts. Cutting the canes doesn't solve it because the underground system is still alive. Digging it out rarely gets every piece, and if even small rhizome sections remain in the soil, the plant can regenerate. A weak barrier, a shallow installation, or one missed opening is often all bamboo needs to escape. What makes it worse is that bamboo problems rarely stay personal. It travels under boundaries. That means your privacy plant can become your neighbor's legal and landscaping headache too. One decorative choice can turn into years of containment, cutting, trenching, and constant monitoring. Yes, clumping bamboo is usually much safer. But running bamboo planted casually is one of the fastest ways to turn a peaceful garden into a long-term underground war. 2. Mint, the sweet-smelling herb with a takeover plan. Mint is the friendliest villain on this list. It smells wonderful, tastes great, and seems like the perfect plant for beginners. Tea, dessert, sauces, summer drinks, what's not to love? The answer is simple. It's behavior in the ground. Mint spreads through runners, and once it gets comfortable, it moves fast. One tidy patch can become a widening network in a surprisingly short time. It slips under mulch between perennials, through herb beds, and out into places where you never intended it to go. What started as a useful kitchen herb can become the only thing left standing in a bed. The reason gardeners warn people so strongly about mint is that it's incredibly difficult to remove completely. Pulling the top growth is satisfying for about 5 minutes. Then it comes back. The root system stays active, and small root pieces left behind often regrow into fresh plants. That's why experienced gardeners almost always keep mint in containers. Not because they're being dramatic, but because they've either seen the consequences or lived through them. Even then, mint still tries to escape through drainage holes or any stem that touches nearby soil. Its greatest trick is usefulness. Because it has culinary value, people keep making excuses for it. They think they'll manage it later. But later usually means after it has already spread into surrounding beds, lawn edges, or cracks near patios. Mint doesn't arrive like a monster. It arrives like a polite guest. Then it quietly takes over the house one room at a time. 3. Japanese knotweed, the plant that can damage more than a garden. Japanese knotweed is not just invasive. It's the kind of plant that can affect how people feel about an entire property. That's because this species is associated not only with aggressive spread, but with expensive structural headaches as well. It grows from a powerful rhizome system that can travel deep and wide underground. Above ground, it forms tall, dense stands that quickly dominate space and shut out surrounding vegetation. Below ground, it seeks weakness gaps beside walls, cracks in paving weak joints, compromised drains, and disturbed soil around structures. The reason this plant has such a terrible reputation is that it doesn't merely crowd other plants out. It can worsen existing weaknesses in built surfaces and make already vulnerable areas much more expensive to deal with. And once it's established, casual removal is almost never enough. Cutting it back won't kill it. Digging it up usually leaves fragments behind, and those fragments do not need to be large to start again. That means what looks like progress can actually be temporary. Many people are shocked to learn that a plant once chosen for ornamental value can become such a serious liability. But fast-growth lush foliage and easy impact often come with a hidden cost. This is not a weed you casually battle on weekends. It's the kind of plant that can turn a landscaping problem into a financial one. English ivy, the elegant strangler. English ivy has fooled generations of gardeners by looking refined. On walls, under trees, along old brick, it creates that classic, timeless look people associate with established gardens and historic homes. But behind that elegance is a plant that slowly turns support into suffocation. Ivy climbs using aerial rootlets that grip tightly to surfaces and work into cracks, mortar joints, siding gaps, and rough bark. On buildings that can mean gradual damage to surfaces already under stress. On trees, it's even worse. Ivy adds weight traps, moisture blocks light, and gives pests and disease an easy path upward. The problem often begins with good intentions. Someone wants evergreen cover in shade, so they plant ivy as a ground cover. For a while it behaves, then it starts climbing. The fence disappears. The tree trunk vanishes. A wall becomes coated. And once the plant matures, berries appear. That's the stage where the problem expands beyond one patch. Birds eat the berries and spread the seeds to new locations, gutters, roof edges, tree bases, fence lines, neighboring yards. Suddenly, you're not dealing with a decorative planting anymore. You're dealing with a dispersal system. It doesn't rush like some aggressive weeds. It does something worse. It climbs slowly, tightens quietly, and smothers with patience. 5. Kudzu, the vine that buries everything under green kudzu, has become famous for a reason. This is not just a vigorous vine, it's a landscape-scale warning. In ideal conditions, kudzu grows at a pace that feels unreal. It runs over shrubs, trees, poles, fences, sheds, abandoned machinery, and anything else standing still long enough to be buried. It doesn't just climb, it blankets, and once it covers something, it blocks the sunlight so completely that whatever lies beneath begins to weaken, decline, or die. Part of what makes kudzu so dangerous is how thoroughly it establishes itself. It roots at nodes, forms expanding networks, and develops deep, heavy root systems that are extremely hard to eliminate. Cutting it back is rarely enough. If anything, incomplete control just buys it time before the next surge. This plant became widespread because people thought fast growth meant fast solutions. Erosion control coverage screening kudzu seemed useful, but some plants are too successful for their own good, and kudzu crossed that line a long time ago. Kudzu is what happens when fast growing becomes a disaster category instead of a selling point. 6. Trumpet vine, beautiful blooms, ugly consequences. Trumpet vine is a classic trap plant. The flowers are dramatic, hummingbirds love them, and when it's blooming, it can look absolutely spectacular. That beauty is why so many gardeners underestimate what comes next. Trumpet vine spreads in more than one way. It climbs aggressively above ground, but it also sends up suckers and runners below ground. So even if the main vine looks under control, the plant may already be expanding underground and preparing to reappear in places you never expected. This is how the story usually goes. Someone plants it on a fence arbor or trellis. The first couple of years feel rewarding. The flowers are stunning. The vine fills in nicely. Then shoots start appearing far from the original base. The vine gets thicker, woodier, and heavier. It starts grabbing gutters siding nearby shrubs and any weak support system it can reach. That's what makes trumpet vine so deceptive. It sells a pollinator paradise, then turns into an aggressive structural and underground nuisance. There are safer ways to attract hummingbirds than planting something that acts like it wants to annex the yard. 7. Wisteria, the romantic climber that can crush its own support. Wisteria is one of the most breathtaking flowering vines in gardening. When it blooms, it looks like something out of a painting. Cascading flower clusters, dramatic drape, old-world charm. Few plants match its visual impact. But wisteria is not delicate. It is powerful. As it matures, the vine becomes thick, woody, and extremely heavy. It wraps around supports with force and keeps expanding year after year. Small pergolas, weak arbors, fence panels, drain pipes, and even young trees can end up twisted, stressed, or broken under its weight and pressure. What makes wisteria such a common regret plant is timing. Early on it seems manageable. It grows quickly, flowers beautifully, and makes the structure look magical. But a mature wisteria behaves like a constrictor. It keeps tightening, thickening, and pushing until the support beneath it starts failing. Wisteria became beloved because it creates instant drama and covers structures beautifully. But that same vigor demands serious discipline. Without constant pruning and strong support, the fantasy vine becomes the reason your pergola needs to be rebuilt. 8. Bermuda grass. The lawn plant that becomes a weed everywhere else. Bermuda grass is proof that a plant can be useful and infuriating at the same time. In warm climates, it's valued as a tough lawn grass. It handles heat, well, recovers quickly, and survives heavy use. But once it escapes the lawn and enters beds, gardens, or borders, it becomes a relentless invader. This grass spreads through seed stolons and rhizomes. In other words, it has multiple backup plans for taking over. It doesn't just show up where you don't want it, it competes hard once it gets there. It wraps through perennial roots, invades vegetable rows, crosses edging, and pushes through mulch with stubborn determination. So the same traits that make Bermuda valuable as a lawn resilience, spread, recovery, persistence are exactly what make it a nightmare in ornamental spaces. It's not just grass, it's a plant with the mindset of an empire. 9. Bishop's weed. The shady ground cover that turns permanent bishop's weed often gets planted in exactly the places where people feel desperate for an easy solution. Deep shade, awkward corners, and underplantings where other species seem to struggle. Its variegated leaves look bright and cheerful, and that visual charm hides how dangerous the plant really is. Once in the ground, bishop's weed spreads through underground rhizomes that break apart easily and regrow readily. That means every incomplete removal attempt helps create the next wave. Over time, it forms dense mats that shut other plants out and erase the original design of the space. And because the foliage is attractive, people tend to tolerate it too long. They keep thinking they can still control it. That optimism usually lasts right up until the plant proves otherwise. Bishop's weed is what happens when a plant solves one design problem by creating a much larger one. 10. Jerusalem artichoke, useful to eat, hard to remove forever. Jerusalem artichoke sounds like a brilliant garden plant. It's edible, productive, and attractive with sunflower-like presence and underground tubers you can harvest. For food gardeners, that sounds like a win. The problem is that every harvest risks replanting it. This plant spreads through tubers, and those tubers are frustratingly easy to miss or break apart. Any piece left in the soil may return as a new plant the following season. So digging doesn't just remove the crop, it can accidentally multiply it. In a controlled, dedicated space, it can be useful. In a mixed bed, it can become a permanent commitment you never intended to make. That's the real danger here, a plant that looks practical and generous at first, then proves it plans to stay for life. 11. Creeping Charlie the weak spot specialist. Creeping Charlie doesn't always attack the best parts of a lawn first. It goes after the stressed parts, the shady patch, the damp edge, the thin section under trees, the poorly drained corner. That's why it's so effective. It targets weakness. It spreads across the ground through creeping stems that root at nodes, creating a connected mat. Once established, it crowds out grass, fills open spaces, and keeps expanding outward. Because it stays low, mowing doesn't really solve the problem. In some situations, it can even help move fragments around. The hardest part is that killing it isn't always straightforward, and even successful treatment means little if the lawn conditions remain weak. Thin turf creates opportunity. Creeping Charlie takes that opportunity every time. It's the kind of plant that doesn't smash through the front door. It finds the loose window in the back and lets itself in quietly. 12. Horsetail, the prehistoric survivor. Horsetail feels less like an ordinary weed and more like a biological warning from another age. It's ancient, strange-looking, and unbelievably difficult to control once established. The plant spreads through deep underground rhizomes that can reach well below what casual digging can access. Those rhizomes break easily and fragments can continue growing. So when people try to remove horsetail mechanically, they often end up disturbing it without actually defeating it. Cutting it back doesn't end it. Digging rarely gets all of it. Surface improvements may help somewhat, but the underground system remains. Many people end up shifting from eradication mode to management mode simply because the plant is so persistent. Horsetail has survived for millions of years. That fact starts to feel very personal when it's in your yard refusing to leave. 13. Tree of Heaven, the plant that poisons the competition. Tree of Heaven earns a spot near the top of the danger list because it combines speed spread and chemical aggression in one package. It grows fast, tolerates terrible conditions, produces huge numbers of seeds, and sends up root suckers well away from the parent plant. So one tree quickly becomes several, and several become a patch. Cut it down carelessly, and the root system often responds by producing even more shoots. But what makes this species especially nasty is that it doesn't only compete through size and numbers. It also releases chemicals that can suppress the growth of nearby plants. So while other species are trying to survive on light water and soil, Tree of Heaven is also interfering with the local playing field. 14. Purple Loosestrife, the beautiful flower that destroys wetlands. Purple Loosestrife is one of the best examples of why beauty should never be your only planting standard. In bloom, it's spectacular. Tall spires of vivid pink-purple flowers make it look like a dream plant for moist ground and pond edges. But once it escapes into natural wet areas, it becomes a serious ecological threat. Purple Loosestrife produces enormous numbers of seeds, and wet environments help those seeds spread. Over time, the plant forms dense stands that crowd out native wetland species. That matters because wetlands depend on plant diversity to support birds, amphibians, insects, and broader ecosystem health. This plant became popular because it looked ornamental and handled wet conditions beautifully. But some beautiful plants don't stay in the garden. Purple Loosestrife is not just a garden mistake, it's an ecological one. 15. Black Locust, the thorny empire builder. And now we come to the final plant on the list, Black Locust. This tree represents everything that makes aggressive plants so dangerous. It spreads through root suckers, grows fast, alters conditions around it, and forms expanding colonies that become harder to remove with every passing year. One tree can turn into many. Many can turn into a thicket. Black locust also brings thorns into the equation, which makes control and cleanup physically harder and more dangerous. Its wood is useful and durable, which is one reason people once planted it intentionally. But usefulness does not cancel out invasiveness. In this case, it helped spread the problem. The tree can also change soil conditions in ways that favor itself and other opportunistic species. So like some of the worst plants on this list, it doesn't merely occupy land, it reshapes the rules of that land. Black locust is the perfect ending to this list because it captures the central lesson of destructive planting. A plant can be valuable, attractive, or practical, and still become a long-term nightmare if its growth habits are strong enough. That's the countdown 15 plants that can quietly turn a garden into a battle zone. Some spread underground, some climb and crush, some blanket everything in shade, some poison the competition, and some look so harmless in the beginning that by the time you realize the truth, the problem is already established. The biggest gardening mistake is not always neglect. Sometimes it's planting the wrong thing with confidence.